Welcome to another Talking Feds one-on-one. I'm really excited about this one because we are talking to the leader of my favorite indie band, the old 97's, Rhett Miller. The group has a new album, American Primitive, that's drawing critical raves at the same time as journalists are marveling at the band's reaching 30 years together with the same lineup. Rhett, bassist Murray Hammond, guitarist Ken Bethia, and drummer Philip Peebles. Rhett Miller, thank you so much for joining Talking Feds.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was almost an attorney in so much as my dad changed the name of his firm to Miller and Miller in the hopes that I would become the
That you
second
might. All right, so
Miller.
now I have to go off script right away and just do the story. So you're Stuart Ransom Miller the second, and he has, referring to barrier reefs, and sometimes he would appear before a judge and say, "I'm Stuart Ransom Miller," and if the judge said back, "And you're a serial lady killer," he knew that the hearing was probably going to go pretty well.
In the
By the
bag.
way, that's just too good a line to be made up. What did someone ever say? I'm already dead. He said, "I'm already." That just struck me as like too good a line to even make up.
I remember I remember writing that song after
Yeah.
a gig in Chicago, and yeah, no, my dad was at the time single and he was bar
Yeah.
hopping a lot. And so
Okay.
when I look back on that song, I don't think it's me. I think it's really a song about my dad being in a bar and picking, I guess I never had that kind of game. I was always
Yeah.
too shy and nervous. But yeah, my dad would have these crazy stories about, picking up a police officer and she showed him all his bullet holes. And
Okay.
he was living quite a life in
Yeah.
his latter years. Yeah.
Got it. Midnight came and midnight went. I thought I was the president. All right, but on to broader old 97 matters. So actually, you and I spoke first time, and you were in sort of a COVID enforced hiatus from touring. You described it as pretty isolated and hard, and especially on some of the band members. I think Murray. Um, it produced an album, 12th, that you said kind of came and went. So in retrospect, how do you look on that period? Is there a sort of silver lining there, or just the sinkhole?
No, my whole life has been about trying to find silver linings. I feel like that's the secret.
Yeah.
Um, 12th, we wrapped it the day before lockdown. So it came out. We could have waited, but I feel like if we had waited to put it out, then when? There was never really a good time for a couple of years. So, but it did come out, in the void. A lot of musicians complain about the art that they made during those years, those couple of years, coming out and being sort of overlooked. And I was sad about that because I do think that was a pretty great record. But whatever. In the larger scheme of things, we all survived that. We're out the other side. I did have a great couple of years being at home with my kids because they were both on the brink of flying the nest, and I got to really spend time with them like I never would have if I had been on the road 200 days a year, as I had been their whole childhoods. And I
Yeah.
also did some gigs online that were, made up for the lost income. So it wound up really being a it worked as best it could.
I felt the same vis-a-vis my kids, except it still seems to me between them and their friends, that was a rough period, and the sort of repercussions of it, I think we're still kind of absorbing.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so as all the reviews of American Primitive justifiably emphasize, the band has maintained the same lineup since its inception, around 30 years strong. That's like miraculous, unheard of. You told Red, the Rolling Stone. I want to set it up with this quote. "It feels so unlikely that we're here in this moment in our career and in our lives, and we've built something that's really pretty unimpeachable. I don't want to fuck it up." And what might, you got the 30 years. What are you thinking? What might fuck it up?
I think the real pitfalls were all avoided during, like, we were on Electra for a number of years, and we had a core group of people that believed in what we did and didn't want to change us. But there's the larger
Bands, you
company.
mean, or record companies, or
Yeah, so like our
yeah,
A&R guy,
Electra? Yeah.
Tom DeSavia, our product manager, Dane, the woman, Lisa Sonkin, who's the head of radio. Like, we had some people that really championed us, got us, wanted us to be us. And we had gone through this whole dog and pony show with 15 record labels back in the day when there was all this money, and they thought we might be the next big thing, hilariously. And but we were pretty adamant with all of them saying we're never going to try to have a hit song. If it happens, that's fine. But we really just want to make the kind of records that we'll never be ashamed of, that we'll never look back on it as an obvious cash grab. And we did come up with a catalog that I feel like we there's no moment where it feels like, oh, that was where we tried really hard to,
Yeah.
that was our attempt at a rap album, or that was our attempt at an electronica
Right.
album, whatever. Like we were always just
Yeah.
us, even though we did stretch the boundaries of what us meant a little bit. So the pitfalls, I feel like we avoided them back in the major label years, and since then, we just kinda get to be who we are. I keep
Yeah.
wondering if we're gonna calm down and sit on stools and, be old make old people music.
Right. Right.
And, like, I'm the youngest guy in the band, and I'm 53 years old, and we officially have a 60-year-old in our band, which freaks me out. I don't think that's okay. I don't know how he did that. It's pretty rude. But I feel like we're still like we still like to rock, you know?
Yeah. Wait till the art solicitation starts showing up. Okay. So how do you view, your own role in that you're the youngest, but you're obviously the leader? What role have you had to play in the group's longevity, would you say?
I had to get out of my own way a lot. I feel like there's a lead singer itis where, we're it's hard to put up with us. I interviewed Stuart Copeland, who's the drummer for the Police.
He's done a sidebar on Talking Feds, actually.
So
What a huge talk about a son of a interesting political. Anyway, what a cool life he had. Yeah.
just a genius and so
Yeah.
generous with his
Yeah.
wisdom. Oh man. But he talked about Sting in a way that made me realize the ubiquity of this problem that
Oh, right.
the lead singers are. So, there was a time during those Electra years when they wanted a solo record for me, and it coincided with my having too many songs, and the band kept turning down all these good songs, and I'd gotten permission from them to make a solo record. Anyway, the cliche is a cliche for a reason, because
Right.
when a lead singer gets too big for his britches or his band, typically it's the death knell for the band, and so we had to survive that, and, I always wanna be right, I always wanna tell everybody what to do, if 2 of them are wearing a plaid shirt, my OCD kicks in, I'm like, "We can't have 2 guys on stage wearing plaid shirts, please." And so, I've had to just let it go. There's sometimes 3 of them will wear a plaid shirt. I just have to let it go, Harry.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I know Copeland has talked about Sting was just the leader and he wanted to take it his way, and that's the way it goes. Um, well, a quick so it sounds like I was going to ask you the sort of leader you are. I read I don't know, you read Bruce Springsteen's autobiography, which is really pretty damn good, but he portrays himself as kind of a tyrant when it comes to band matters in terms of calling the shots. It sounds like you are not. You try to just sort of either go along or achieve some kind of consensus. Is that right?
We used the REM model, which was,
Yeah.
a very sort of communist approach to, especially specifically,
Self-consciously, Rhett?
yeah, yeah,
Like we're
we
gonna do like REM. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, they were one of our favorite bands. We wound up
Yeah.
getting to be friends with them. In fact,
Yeah.
Peter plays on our new record.
Right, right, right. I was gonna say.
But, even back in the '90s, we thought about how they'd been together so long, like 15 years, and we were trying to figure out how we would share our publishing money, and that winds up being the thing that drives a wedge between band members. When
Oh,
money starts rolling in, the lead singer-songwriter winds up getting the lion's share of it because he
yeah.
wrote the song, where
Right.
the drummer and bass player, they also gave up good jobs and any chance at a normal life to be in this band, but since they didn't sit down and come up with the melody and the lyrics, they don't get the same money. So we didn't do the straight 25 each that REM did. I get a little bit more than, the drummer,
Mhm.
for instance, but it was still, the idea was that everybody shares in all the money that comes in. So whenever we play a gig, we split the money evenly. Whenever a song gets used on a TV show, we split the money pretty evenly. And that's very intentional. And that was something we did to try and keep the band together. And in the same way, we make decisions, in an egalitarian way. the person that puts his foot down more than anyone else is our guitar player, Ken. He'll say no, but then even then, a lot of time we can, back him off his veto and say, you got to trust me on this. There was a song on a record a few records back called State of Texas. And it was a song that I wrote while on tour in a solo tour in Germany, opening for Steve Earle. I was homesick. I wrote a song about Texas. To me, it wasn't like a calculated, oh, we're going to make so much money, appealing to this Texas, nationalism.
Right.
And Ken Bethea, our guitar player, saw it differently. He's like, this is the most jingoistic thing I ever heard. You just cash grabbing all. So I had to tell him, like, no, this
Yeah.
is going to be good. People, they're not going to see it as being some sort of pandering thing. And that song wound up being the theme song for the nascent Longhorn TV network when that was getting going. And so for years, that State of Texas, our song, was the theme song to the network of the team that Ken most closely follows and lives by. And so, who was right?
No,
Me.
right. Right. Wow, that's terrific. It's like Home with the Armadillo, but so it literally became the theme song, huh? Let me switch gears a little. So, to your fans, I think you kind of given them. Your fans often feel like they discovered you personally, or something. But you're on the one hand like a killer raucous bar band, but also a kind of alt rock intellectual band. Do you have a view of, what sort of band the old 97's are?
I remember Sylvia Rohn was the president of Elektra when we were on the label, and
Yeah.
at one point, maybe it was we were about to make our third record for them, and all of the records had done well critically, but none of them had sold. In the way that like Third Eye Blind was selling on our label. But Sylvia came to
Right.
me and she said, "Honey, why do you got to be so sophisticated?" And I was like, God, I thought that was a good thing, but it turns out it's not if you want to
Yeah.
sell a lot of records, I guess.
Yeah.
So I still think it's a good thing because I think sophisticated ages better than, of the moment. And yeah, we never tried to be anything other than what we are, and I'm glad people like us. I don't think too much about it. Every once in a while, if I feel like I'm doing something that feels inauthentic, I'll try
Yeah.
and take a step back. But yeah, no, I've never known what I would even do to try and make a lot of money. You know, if you can
Or
think of something,
and
tell me.
whether so you're more okay. I mean, just so even your real like killer bar songs just have a they're literate in a way others aren't, but that you're literate. So
I remember John Doe from the band X
yeah.
in 1996. He
You
told
keep
me,
going through all these bands that are all now in the graveyard while the
uh,
old
uh,
97's are. Yeah, but go ahead.
although X
He's
is back around,
they're yeah, sort of,
yeah.
kind of, sort of. Yeah,
But
go ahead.
John told me,
Yeah,
he goes, Think about it. If you really want to be in a bar band for your whole life,"
yeah,
and his point, I think, was, maybe think bigger, put yourself in theaters, make it so
uh,
that make it so your band is scalable. So you're not only, making, loud punk rock music about beer, give
yeah,
yourself a little bit larger of a higher ceiling.
yeah. I remember an interview that John Lennon did when it was all over, talk about having been to the top and just saying, the days in Hamburg as the local, that they were the best. They were paradise, everything after that. Um, that kind of, I wonder what touring is like for you now. So I think of the song Longer Than You've Been Alive, and that song even was 10 years ago. You're not, hanging out in bars until 2. You're married, 20 years, sober, kids in college. What's your touring routine when do you go to like museums? Do you eat healthfully and exercise? What's it like being on the road?
A version of that is the answer because there's something about being on the road that is anti-intellectual, and it's also anti-healthy.
Right. Yeah.
The tour wants you to sit in the back lounge of the tour bus in the dark, sleep until 2 in the afternoon. It wants you to get drunk to make everything easier to deal with. So we as a band have sort of figured out ways around it. We play a lot of disc golf, which is so goofy, but we've got our
Yeah.
little,
What you mean
plastic.
this thing on the golf courses with the got it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they make specific courses. Usually they're in forests or woods or
Mhm.
maybe, town parks. But wherever we wind up, we'll wake up on the bus. We'll do a Google search of where's the closest disc golf course. We'll Uber there. We'll spend 2 hours throwing our frisbees around in the woods. And just, it's great because you're in the woods. You're not looking at your phone. Yeah, giving up booze and weed was really helpful for me because that's such a trap, and my body got less good at processing all that stuff. But, I get it why bands break up. I get it why artists, wind up with addiction issues. It's a hard life. We made a choice early, well, really when our kids were all little in the early aughts, so about 20 years ago, we made a choice as a band to have our touring. So we were on tour way less than we had been, less than our contemporaries. It cost us some in those early in the aughts when some of our contemporaries were having their moment. We
Yeah.
sort of kept chugging along, but I think in the long run, it made it possible for us to stay together, for us to keep our families together. And we've been able to make it work long haul, which is thank
Yeah.
God, knock wood.
Um, yeah, so unusual. So are you still use I was looking at your tour schedule. There's not too many dates, but they're kind of far flung. You're going to be in Northern Cal, in a few weeks. So I was wondering, should I shoot up there? But is you take a bus from one to the other,
For
on your
the
when you're touring?
For the tours we do. So if we're
Yeah,
out for 2 or 3 weeks, we'll get on it. We just did a West Coast run. We started in, Arizona. We went all the way over the coast up to the Pacific Northwest, down
yeah,
through the mountains. The whole thing was on a tour bus. In August, we'll do the Midwest, same thing. In September, we'll do the East Coast in a bus. It's a lot easier, and now that we're older,
yeah,
it costs you a little bit of money, but, we're lucky enough to be able to make it work.
yeah. It's like a trip. You can leave your stuff in the bus.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about your songwriting a little bit, and I've always been impressed by your range, Rhett. So, critics are like when they try to describe the albums, they're wrestling with themselves because there's so many. I read, American Primitive, alt country, rock, and punkabilly. To say nothing of the last song, by the way, American Primitive, which is Estuvier Cayendo, sounds like flamenco or something, reprise of Falling Down. So I just wonder what your songwriting process is like. Do you start with, a tune segment or chords? Do you compose on a piano? Do you have lyrics in mind, etc.?
Yeah, it's funny that you ask that because I feel like my next act is to lean into songwriting as a craft. I've been
Yeah.
teaching it at retreats and workshops. I did a stint at Arizona State University's great College of the Performing Arts there. I'm not allowed to announce it, but it looks like I'm going to be taking a job in the fall teaching songwriting at a college in New York City. So that's become more a
Wow.
part of my life. I love it. I love the craft of it. I feel like there's some nobility in it. I feel like songwriting is a machine that processes trauma. I feel that when we give songs to the world, we're giving a gift to the world. So I'm working on a book about it. So songwriting is something I think about a lot. It's something that I feel like to pass on the skill to the next generation is going to be very valuable because I feel like our culture needs music in spite of the fact that our culture is constantly devaluing music and making it harder for songwriters to make a living. So I love it. I write songs. I would say I write songs all the time, but I go through like I'm in a period right now where I'm not writing a lot of songs. We just put out a new record. When we finished that record, I still had 25 songs that I felt really strongly about that we didn't use. So I feel a little blocked up. I need to get my juices flowing again because in September I'm hosting a songwriting retreat in the Catskills, and I gotta put my money where my mouth is. I gotta keep writing songs, man.
That's amazing. Now I'm thinking of the Elvis Costello bar because it really is about songwriting and the craft. But I want to double back to my question. So do you have a typical way you start, a typical core of a song?
Yeah, so I always think about it as there's a spark that you get, and usually for me, I'll be reading something and there'll be just a phrase that wants to be a song, that wants to be a chorus, that wants to be the first line in a verse, and I can't get it out of my head. And and I'll be walking around, and that phrase will suggest a second phrase, and those two phrases together will have a melody inherent in them. Usually it has to do
But you're
with
just getting at the time you're getting gas or at the
yeah,
baseball game or whatever.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And then I'll get the itch that I need to hold a guitar in my hand while I'm working these phrases over. And for me, the great thing is that it's all about instinct and intuition. And the song, it's not like it writes itself, but it's like it wants to be written. So that phrase wants a second phrase. Those two phrases want a melody. That melody becomes a verse, and that verse wants a chorus. So it snowballs.
Wow. Um, okay, so that's a really good segue to your. I mean, you're an accomplished writer from. You don't do that much of it, but the Atlantic to Sports Illustrated, and from that seems like it's always been a part. Well, let's start here. What do you like to read? What do you have specific reading habits?
I listen to a ton of audiobooks, and
Uh
even though my kids will tell you that's not reading, I disagree.
huh.
But
Okay.
I do so much driving and traveling that to hold
Uh,
a physical book is pretty tough. I keep one next to my bed at all times. I usually travel with one in my backpack, a physical book.
okay.
But for when the physical books, I usually keep short stories or like a book about songwriting or something like that. But when I my audiobook intake, I just finished Stephen King's great new book of short stories. You Like It Darker,
Yeah.
and
A personal friend of the family, as it turns out, bizarrely enough, of the Miller clan. But
yeah, he's
yeah,
great. He and
that turns out,
to
yeah.
he's
Okay,
the
so Steve, I don't want to, I interrupted myself. Okay, Stephen King, give me more that you read, your reading habits.
It's funny, I'm going back right now and reading some John D. MacDonald. He'd
Uh,
written the Travis McGee series, which I
right.
have plowed through 3 times now, and, there were some standalone, John D. MacDonalds that I never read. I tend towards, genre fiction, which is to
Yeah.
say, like, thrillers, whodunits. There's Anthony Horowitz is a modern whodunit writer who writes these very meta, sort of, uh, mystery novels.
Yeah.
So I tend to read a lot of mystery novels. I'll read some. I recently reread Underworld, the Don DeLillo
Yeah.
novel, which is my favorite of his. He's probably my favorite novelist uh, in terms of literature.
Oh
I read
man,
a
you're
lot.
killing me. We're never gonna finish this. Okay, so let's just a little. All right, Underworld and well, um, yeah, hell, we can't go on this detour. But if it weren't Underworld, what would it be?
For
He's amazing. He. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I grew up in Dallas,
Yeah.
so maybe
Yeah.
Libra, but with its
Oh,
Oswald.
Libra, right.
You know what? If I was to give you a pairing
Yeah.
of 2 books, if I was
Yeah.
gonna say this is literature,
Yeah.
highbrow, lowbrow, I would say Libra, and then 11/29/63, the Stephen King time travel
Right.
book about trying to prevent the Kennedy
Yeah,
assassination.
and Libra is for listeners about Oswald and Kennedy and the like. Yeah, I've stayed through with him, but I just think there was this period around like the names and where he just reached some
Yeah,
high point that
Zenith.
still hasn't been fully recognized. Um, okay. All right. Well, speaking of, let's go to the band's name. So it refers to there's an American railroad disaster at the turn of the 20th century, but that gives rise to a famous country ballad that in turn becomes the subject of a famous copyright lawsuit. Does the name pick up on all these aspects? One in particular, why the old 97's?
When we started the band, Murray and I had been trying to do these bands that were intentionally signable, commercial. We were trying to
Mm,
be like in the early 90s, mid 90s, what the marketplace wanted. And we were feeling inauthentic and it wasn't working. So we shut everything down for a few months. And Murray came to me and said, because I'd been writing these kind of mid tempo Americana sounding songs.
yeah.
And Murray came and said, "What if we started a band that just was in coffee shops, didn't stand a chance of getting signed to a major record label deal, And of course, that was the band that worked. So when we were trying to name that band, we almost intentionally picked a band name that was clunky and uncool.
Ah,
The word old will
yeah.
never be good marketing. And we were both big Johnny Cash fans, and
Uh-huh.
he had the most famous version of The Wreck of the Old 97.
Mm.
So Murray came to me and said, "What about the old 97's?" And I said, that's maybe too uncool. But he said, "What about, Joe Strummer had this band, the 101ers. So
Right.
the old 97's is kind of like our version of that." And I said, "Yes," and I've regretted it ever since, but also it kind of worked. And maybe its uncoolness helped us be who we are.
Yeah, that's great. That's certainly once you got known. Wow. Okay. Hey, let's go back to your dad for a second. He was Stuart Ransom Miller. You're Stuart Ransom Miller too.
Yeah.
And we've heard about him a little in your music, but we're a law and politics oriented podcast. I'm just wondering if your legal gene is kicking in these days. Do you follow the Trump stuff? Are you thinking about where the country's going, or is that for other people to worry about for now?
Mostly the latter. Like
Yeah.
it gives me tired head. I grew up in my dad's office.
Yeah.
In the 70's and early 80's, kids were just left, in the office until midnight whenever the dad carried him home and put him in bed.
Right.
And nobody worried about the cigar smoke. Nobody tried to make sure the kid had an
The
iPad.
highlighters, and you could slide on the carpet, slide the supply cabinets. Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I
Yeah.
was I wasn't interested in, his law stuff.
Yeah.
But the part of the law that interests me most right now has to do with AI and has to do with,
Yeah.
the intellectual property and how do we deal with, the coming, shitstorm, excuse my
Yeah.
language, that is.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
understated. Yeah.
The Trump thing, I feel like I don't wanna get drawn into the hope that it's the end for him,
Yeah.
so I try not to think about it too much. But in general, no, I've got my brain too full thinking about my teenagers, how to pay for their college, and then
Right.
writing the next song.
All right. Fair enough. And then finally, while we're just going through what a remarkable polyglot you are, you have why not a newsletter and a podcast with conversations with other creative folks. So just can you tell us a word or two about how you got into that and what role it fits that the rest of your other pursuits didn't?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the multi-hyphenate thing is really just, a representation of the kinda hustle required to lead an artistic life in this day and age,
mm,
or maybe in any day and age. We've always depended on, the Medici's, whatever version. So,
yeah,
thank God there's some wealthy folks out there that still support the arts because God knows the government isn't, and the means of distribution are no longer supportive of artists. But I've got to do a podcast because these conversations that normally would happen backstage, it's great. I feel like they help up and coming artists to understand that we're all going through this. The voices in your head that try and keep you down, the market forces that try and keep you down. These are all the things that we all deal with, and even the most successful among us, have to fight these little battles every day in our own brains or in the marketplace. As far as the Substack newsletter, that's a pretty recent addition for me, and it's every once in a while a new thing comes along that I feel like everyone in my job is required to partake in. It was podcasts. Now it's Substack. I love it though because it gives me a reason to sit down at least once a week and write an essay or something. To provide some content that comes from my brain and uses words. So I've really loved the Substack, but yeah, it's all just the hustle. The hustle is real, Harry.
yeah. In one form or another. Yeah, I see that. You can't be a total hermit, but man, you must be working all the time. Um, let's talk a little bit more about the new album, American Primitive. You've called it a de-evolution. As much as I want us to calm down and grow up, the songs that felt right for this record were mostly big and loud and brutal and dirty. And the recording session sounded, just like one step up from a jam session. Was that, intentional? Were you aiming for something in particular with that approach?
I feel like It's music or art is so often a response to the world around it, or the music
Yeah.
that's just come before it, in the same way that punk rock was a response to disco. For me, the way we approached this album wasn't just a response to the way we had made the last couple of records, which were, I felt really proud of those albums, but they were with Vance Powell in Nashville primarily, and he does all the Chris Stapleton records. So there are these incredible sounding records that utilize the most modern technology, and everybody was perfected. Like, I was the perfect version of me. The drummer, all of his beats were perfect. Everything was kind of perfect. But I started getting really bothered by the idea of perfection because it seems like it's ruining music just as a concept. So I wanted to make a record that turned its back on perfection as a goal and just let the band be the band, warts and all. Let's learn the songs on the fly. The version you hear is pretty close to the version. As soon as everybody got the chords down and kind of figured out, oh, this is, I guess, what I would do on this song, that was it. We move on to the next song. And I feel like that's a really great way to capture who a band is, and specifically who our band is. And our guitar player, Kin, I feel like if given too much time, you hear a version of Kin that is great, but it's a little too perfect. So for me, I really love it when Kin is just this big, dumb single note guitar, playing like garage rock. And that's ironically, maybe that's why, or appropriately, that's why we've wound up on the underground garage, the Sirius Satellite Radio
Yeah.
underground garage station. Their cruise next year, we're one of the featured bands on that cruise.
Oh, is that
So
right? By the way, the best station out there, Steve Van
agreed.
Zandt. That's really interesting. Maybe you like me to try to get next to and appreciate the music your kids listen to. And I often have that feeling like it's been perfectly done, and I don't really have a sense of who the artist is underneath it. And you feel like it could almost be ginned up to that, perfect polish with anyone and everyone with the right kind of producer. So yeah, I like that song. I tell my daughter Lila, but I'm also I don't get a sense of the artist in the same way. Maybe you could put it that way.
Which
Yeah.
is, why
Yeah.
my daughter's a Swiftie, and I've become,
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah, whose isn't right?
by virtue of Stockholm syndrome, perhaps a Swiftie myself. But at least, I mean, her ubiquity, and it's all too
Yeah.
much, but at least it's very much her when you hear it.
She's really yes.
Yeah.
uh, we're going through the greatest hits, but man, yeah, my hat's off to her as well, especially the songs she was writing when she was 15, 16.
Right.
Um, okay, well, so relatedly, a lot of the songs, maybe American Primitive itself or Magic, seem like they would get any bar crowd on their feet. But the hit, I don't know if this come as a surprise to you. I mean, you said you don't try to write hits. So far, the first one, Where the Road Goes, much more contemplative. It sounds to me almost like a road movie, like going with references even to your teenage years, but from downtown Dallas to a cabin on the coast, who knows where the road goes. So it seems to be like taking us all the way through the 30 years. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that was I let myself go there, even though I felt as I was doing it like, "Oh man, is this gonna be corny?" Anytime
Yeah,
you use the phrase "the road" is just such
right.
a button that we push
Right.
in as songwriters, and it's over pushed, as it were. So
Mhm.
when I was sitting on the bank of the Blackfoot River in Montana, and I was playing through, in that case, just a chord progression was looping. My fingers were doing it unconsciously, and I started thinking of all these different locations, all these times in my life, and I almost shut myself down because I thought, nah, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
This is too
Too
cheesy.
schlocky. Yeah.
Yeah, but then I thought, "No, I'm gonna let myself go there and see what happens," because usually that, self, editing, usually that means I'm getting close to something that's good, and I have to, like, on the first draft at least, let myself go there. So I did, and I wound up, being really proud of it, and I thought, earnestness can be gross and off-putting, but sometimes it's really worthwhile, and if my only problem with the song is a fear of being, like, overly vulnerable, that's a good problem to have. So I'm really proud of that song.
Yeah.
I feel like it addresses something that not a lot of songs address, which is, the sort of or successfully address, and I hope this one
Yeah.
does, the gratitude of having survived the moments in your life where you wanted to end it all, because what we don't realize as adolescents who want to take our own life, for instance, is that somewhere down the road, we're going to look back on that moment and say, thank God it didn't work because I'm here now. And this is a beautiful moment.
Yeah. Enough said. I do think that that retrospective look and coming to a kind of, reconciliation, or I would live it all again. Where I know it's a very literary for interview with a garage rock band or whatever, but it puts in mind, when such a one as I gives up remorse, we must laugh and we must sing, right? Um, okay. Back to the sound. So Tucker Martine, who produces My Morning Jacket, produced American Primitive. What would you say he brought to the sound?
Tucker brought like, I don't understand the knobs and buttons and all the
Yeah.
machines that he uses, and he didn't, make a big deal about it. I know he did a lot in terms of capturing the sound, and I think Murray, our bass player, who's a studio head, paid a lot of attention to that. To me, I was just grateful when I'd go into the control room that, this sounds great," because we were working fast, so he had to
Right.
keep up
Good point.
with
Yeah.
us. But he kept a really, positive, environment. His studio is really nice. I love Portland, Oregon, just as a town. It's one of the towns that whenever we go through there, spend whenever I spend time there, I think, "Man, I could live here."
I can see you going into Pal's books and coming out 4 hours later. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I love that room, or those rooms, but,
Yeah.
yeah, he just
Okay.
he made it easy. He wasn't
Mhm.
bossy. He would occasionally have a suggestion, but nothing too heavy-handed, which was good because, like I said, we were moving very fast.
Okay. Another title question, American Primitive. There's a Pulitzer Prize winning volume of poetry. There's the open tuning steel string guitar style. There's the School of Early American Art. All a mashup of all those, or how did it come to you?
So those all went in, that Mary Oliver, collection is on my bedside table and has been forever.
Uh-huh.
But it was inspired by a Stephen King book called Duma Key, where
Yeah.
he has a character who's, later in life taken up painting and finds he has a real knack for it, and, is described in a review by an art critic as American primitive. His style is described as American primitive, and, as I read that phrase, I knew all of the other contexts, all the other uses of that phrase, but something about in that moment, it landed to me as, like, that's what the old 97s are. That's because we don't
Yeah.
really know what we're doing. It's all built on these American, artistic building blocks, musical building blocks. We're very much like cavemen, just, painting on the wall, scratching on the wall with rocks. And so I wanted to use that phrase. I was in Peachtree, Georgia that night. It was the night before I was supposed to film my appearance in Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah.
volume 3, because the old 97s did the holiday special for Guardians. And then I went back and did an appearance, a few cameos in volume 3, the actual movie. And so I was nervous about that. It was a beautiful evening in Georgia. I was watching, all the birds and the trees out from my balcony. And so I wrote that song. It was a little bit about feeling like I was maybe missing my home and my wife, I guess. But I wanted that phrase in it because I saw it in my head as, a really useful phrase in a potential album title, and I don't do that very often, but I wanted that phrase to be the chorus, and so I sort of back engineered the song out of that, and the song feels like it works as a song, and it felt authentic, but I knew I wanted that phrase.
Got it. Okay. Following up on, scratching on the walls. You came of age in what, like a post grunge Texas music scene. I would say you maybe ruled the scene. What's the health of the scene you left behind? Is it still robust? And is there a new generation that's emerging down there?
So I have not lived in Dallas since
Yeah.
98,
Right.
97. And but I go through a lot. My mom lives there, my brother lives there. The band is still based out of there. So and it's still, our hometown and our biggest market. But my finger on the pulse of the Dallas music scene at any given moment, I wouldn't claim to totally understand it. I
Yeah.
do keep up with my friends who are in the scene. And I do see up and coming younger artists, and I feel like it's great. I feel like Dallas is a kind of a great place to be from for reasons that maybe seem counterintuitive, uh, because it is such a commercially driven city. It doesn't support the arts in obvious ways like Austin, for instance. But because it's so commercially driven and because it doesn't emphasize in the ways of some other towns its artistic side, the artistic side has to fight through. It's like a weed poking up through a sidewalk, and it becomes more resilient. It becomes more self-sufficient, and the scene takes care of itself in a way that if you were in Austin, for instance, there might be more infighting or more jealousy or scrabbling for, purchase. But because we're all in it together in Dallas, it really makes the scene, and I feel like this is still the case, it really makes the scene stronger because we're all having to sort of fight through the thick, tough shell that is the big hair oil money Dallas
Yeah, no,
gestalt.
that's a really good point. I mean, the crassness, I'm thinking of, she's not from Dallas, but Mary Carr's memoirs, they're so reactive to what you think of it. Or look, I live in California and San Diego, people are always throwing the stereotypes of San Diego at me. I'm not an artist, but my general take on it is they're right, but you can tack around them or fight through them. Stereotype, you said it not long ago in this half an hour ago. Cliches are cliches for a reason, but you can tack around them. But sort of more generally, though, Rhett, I'm going. You also mentioned, the whole TikTok, social media proliferation, and I'm just wondering if you have a sense of this, if it's kind of killed off music scenes like Texas, because music communities, I don't know, do they still come together in clubs, or are they all kind of online, and so there's not the same kind of organic growth of a cool center and people actually being physically in a room or rooms as there was before? Is that, you think there's anything to that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I wrote a piece for the Baffler 5 or 6 years ago. That's They asked if I would. Chris Lehman was editing at the time, the great Chris Lehman, and
Yeah.
he asked if I would write sort of an updated version of the Steve Albini, who recently passed away.
Right, 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 right.
Steve Albini had written a piece about the music industry, and it's one of the greatest pieces ever. And I wrote my sort of modern update, but yeah, I talk in it. I talk a lot about um, how I feel terrible for young musicians because they don't have the same kind of support system that we had back pre-phone, pre-garage band, computer recording. It's easier to make music, but it's harder to make a music scene. And it's really tough. I try to, as much as I can, mentor younger artists when I come across them, and it seems like I might be able to help. But man, I just can't even imagine. The people who are doing it now are really the people who have no choice. You're just doomed to, fight this quixotic battle against, the irrelevance of this thing that we're doing. And I know it's not irrelevant. I know that the world needs music, but I don't know that the world recognizes that anymore. So it's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like an end there, but let's any particular artists you think people should check out? Younger
Um,
people?
it's funny. I just got a call. David Wax Museum is no longer a new band. They've been around a long time, but I got a call from David, and he and his wife do the David Wax Museum. Still such a great band. There's a young band out of North Carolina, the lead singer of which, Clinton Roberts, was at my songwriting retreat last year. And as soon as he started singing, I thought, oh my God, this guy's the real deal. And his band Holler Choir just put out a new record. They opened our West Coast tour, and they're great. There's a lot of great music. I don't think it'll stop coming out. I hope people keep finding it.
Ferment in the same way. Rhett Miller, I feel like these 45 minutes have like had a sort of range that you live, but is dazzling to me. Thanks so much for being here. Best of luck with American Primitive, and be really eager to see what the next 30 years look like.
Thank you. Thanks, Harry. Keep fighting the good fight, man. I really appreciate what you do.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.